I'm Lindsay Sturkey, and welcome to Simple Spiritual Practices. In each episode of this podcast, we'll talk about one tangible practice that will help you know yourself and God better. Most of these practices can be done in 5 minutes or less, so you can easily try it out today. If you are ready to experience real growth in your life, or if you want fresh ideas on how to approach your time with God, this podcast is for you. The earliest memory that I have as a child is of being on a stage. I remember being in the sanctuary of our little Baptist church, standing on the stage next to my mom, looking down at the microphone while I sang "Jesus Loves Me." I don't really remember seeing the people out in the seats. Maybe I never really looked up. But I do remember standing there next to my mom and singing, and then I remember walking away from the stage and looking back at it as we went back to our seats. Now, I've checked this memory with my mom, and it did in fact happen in the way that I remembered, and I was 2 years old at the time that I sang that song on the stage. Now, I've heard that whatever our earliest memory is has significant meaning, that we remember it for a reason. And the fact is, that would be the first of many times I would find myself on a stage. I grew up singing in church, performing in musicals at both church and school. I did dance and choir and band. I performed in piano recitals. As an adult, I've not only sang on stages, but spoken from them as well. So I tend to feel pretty comfortable on a stage in front of people. Now, I would not say that my personality is one of seeking the spotlight. If I'm in a crowd, I like to fade into the background, but I do feel comfortable on a stage in front of people if it's doing something I know I can do well. But as you might assume, there are some unhealthy things that can rise up in us when we often find ourselves on the stage. At some point, I did become aware of the eyes looking back at me. And I began to believe that what I did on the stage was the reason I was loved and valuable by people and even by God Himself. I began to seek love and approval through what I did on the stage. And it took a lot of inner work for me to not only recognize this, but to begin to heal from it, to find my value as a beloved child of God completely outside of what I did or did not do, whether I found myself on a stage or hidden in the background or somewhere in between. There's an incredible song by Nichole Nordeman called "Lean" that describes this part of my story really well, and I want to quote some of the lyrics here. Here's what the song says. When did we learn to perform, to need the encore, to know who we are? When did we forget our place is not on a stage, but safe in your arms? When will I let go, be still and just know? When will I see? When will I just believe? I could stand, I could fall. You want all of me. I could run, I could crawl. You will always be. You're not impressed with all of my best, not disappointed when I don't land on my feet. In everything, you are asking me to lean. Now, I wanted to share the song lyrics with you because they just describe that experience in my life so well. And I would encourage you to look up that song and listen to the whole thing because it's just so good. And I love that picture that she paints of God loving us whether we are standing or falling, because God asks us not to perform, but to surrender. Life is not a performance, and we are still okay even when we don't get the steps exactly right. Whether we are standing tall or falling down, we are always being invited to lean on Jesus. Something I remember being told multiple times growing up as someone who sang in front of other people a lot was the encouragement to sing for an audience of one. Now, you may have heard some version of that before because you could translate that to other aspects of life. It's not just about singing. It basically means to not live for the applause of people, but to live your life for an audience of one, as though God alone is watching you. And the heart behind that advice is good. And I know what people are getting at when they say that, to sing for an audience of one. But that still puts me on a stage and God in the audience, as though He is a distant judge with His arms crossed, watching me perform for Him to see if I'll get it right. Something I remember my mentor sharing with me years ago forever changed how I thought about being on a stage, or even just singing worship songs in my room alone at the piano. Here's what he said. Instead of imagining that you're singing for God, imagine you are singing with Him. Think of Him right there beside you. You are not performing for Him, but He is right there with you in it. See, we are not singing or living for an audience at all. God is not out there in the audience watching you perform your life. He is living it with you and through you. Life is not a performance. As that song Lean says, our place is not on a stage, but safe in God's arms. Now, there is nothing wrong with being on a literal stage. I myself still lead worship on a regular basis at our church and find myself on stages even today. But the difference is I stand on a stage in a place of freedom, not earning love or belonging, but showing up as already loved. This is an area of my life that God has really transformed in so many ways. And while I still, of course, have to work on this and be aware of my motivations and the posture of my heart as I'm on a stage, I am very aware of God doing it with me and through me, rather than me needing to impress or perform. I'm not simply doing it for God, I'm doing it with Him. And in those moments where I feel that impulse to perform, God reminds me of the truth that He is there with me in it, that it's not a performance, that He is living that moment with me. So my encouragement to you is whatever you find yourself doing today in your work, your parenting, even if you find yourself on a literal stage, remember that life is not a performance. God does not demand perfection, but He wants to live life with you. Rather than trying to prove yourself or perform, may you live from a place of knowing how loved you already are. If you want to reflect on this further, I'd encourage you to look up that song, Lean, by Nichole Nordeman, and really listen to those lyrics. And I'm going to put a link in the show notes as well to look up that song. So listen to that song and ask God to show you where in your own life you might be performing rather than simply surrendering. And whatever you do today, imagine that God is doing it with you, that He is right there beside you each step of the way. As we wrap up today, I just want to share a quick update with you. I'm going to be taking a bit of a summer break from the podcast, so this will be the last new episode for about the next couple months. There are a couple reasons for that. Like many of you, my kids are now on summer break from school, and so I really want to be intentional and present with them this summer. And that's not to say I couldn't do the podcast and do that as well, but I just feel like there's some seasons where it's helpful to cut back in certain areas. So for this summer, it just felt like a good time to take a break from creating new episodes. The other reason is I really want to take some time to get refreshed, both creatively and personally. It's really important to me that I am creating these episodes out of an overflow of what God is doing in me. And sometimes coming up with new content every week can be hard. It's tough. And so I really want to make sure that I'm taking the time to pay attention to my own soul and what God is doing so that I can come back fresh and just ready to share with you the things that I'm learning. And so I'm really wanting to take this time to get filled up so I have something to give so that this podcast hopefully continues to be helpful for you. Something I do want to tell you though is there will be replay episodes released probably about every other week throughout the summer. I'm going to choose some of my favorite episodes, and these are ones that center on practices that to me are the most foundational. So Darren is going to be releasing those about every other week during this break, and in your podcast feed, they will clearly be labeled replay at the beginning of the title. That way you'll know it's not a new episode. But I'm guessing there are episodes that you've missed, so hopefully this can be a way to listen to some of those that you haven't heard before, or even just to review some of the practices that we've already talked about. So I will be back with new episodes sometime probably late August or early September. I don't have an exact date yet, but it's probably going to be around the beginning of school. So if you want to make sure you don't miss when a new episode releases, there are several ways to make sure that you're following along. The best way is to make sure you're subscribed to the podcast, and so new episodes will show up automatically in your podcast app. Another thing you can do is follow me on Instagram or my Facebook page. And I'll probably be pretty quiet in those spaces this summer, but when new episodes are available, I always share that in those spaces. Another way you can stay in touch with when new episodes come out is to sign up for my email list, which I have that link in the show notes if you want to sign up for that. So I will make sure to send out an email when the next new episode releases. In addition to that, as soon as you sign up, you're going to get a free spiritual practices toolkit. And this is just a quick reference guide you can print out. It has my favorite practices, how to do them. It's just kind of a one-page reference sheet that reminds you of the steps for these practices. And this is a great resource if you just kind of need a place to start in starting to incorporate some of these practices into your daily life. And after the summer break, if you're on that email list, I will email you about once a month at the very most. So don't worry about me flooding your inbox. Thank you for hanging with me during those several announcements. I'm so grateful that you took the time to listen today, whether this is your first episode or you've been listening for a while. And I'm so excited to come back after the summer with fresh content. And I pray that for you and I both, we are able to create space this summer for God to do what only He can do as He continues to grow us from the inside out. I hope you have a great summer, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of Simple Spiritual Practices. If you want to download a free printable for this week's practice or find other resources to help you take next steps, visit lindsaysurkey.com/free. This podcast is part of the New Hope Podcast Network, and production is done by Darren Hansen. You can check out all the podcasts on the network by visiting newhopechurch.cc/listen. Make sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to listen to the replays this summer and so you don't miss out on new episodes.